One thing to note about a variable APR rate is that the issuer of said card or loan does have to let you know 45 days in advance before the rate changes. Now, that is by law as well, so you will definitely know when the APR rate is kind of coming up to a change in time. So the third type of APR rate I want to talk about is going to be the purchase APR. Now, if you're paying in full, you don't really have to worry as much about this because it really only accrues interest whenever it revolves into the following months. But it is to note, generally these APR rates can be a little on the higher side and really kind of not penalize you, but incentivize you to try and pay in full each month instead of letting that kind of balance revolve on. So moving on to balance transfer APR rates, like the name implies, this occurs anytime a line of credit that you have transfers to a newer line. So for example, if one of your credit cards has an average APR rate of 22% and you owe $2,000, well, if you were to transfer the balance over the course of 2 years, you would save more than $250 if that newer line of credit was 14%. So moving on to the next category, it's going to be the introductory APR rates. Now, I kind of touched on this briefly before with those variable APR rates, but more specifically, those introductory, once again, are kind of those bonuses that a lot of credit card companies put on some of their cards. It really is there to incentivize you using their cards and offering you generally anywhere from 3 months to up to, sometimes even 2 years with little to no interest having been accrued. This is a great bonus, and definitely if you can, I would take advantage of this, but also keep in mind as well, you want to manage your credit utilization rate. Now, I'm sure if you've watched a lot of our videos, you are sick and tired of me saying that, but it's very, very important, honestly, and I can't stress this enough. Just because your credit limit is at a certain amount doesn't mean you should always go up to that amount. It's very important you stay well below 50%, even below 30%, and if you can, beneath 10%, because if you go above, you'll be labeled as high risk, which actually lowers your credit score. The next type of credit card APR rates I'm going to discuss is the cash advance one. Now, this one really only applies if you have a bank card or you are withdrawing money from a ATM, and it tends to be one of the highest interest rates, which is why I definitely recommend you do not go this route and try to avoid it if at all possible. Finally, the last type of APR rate I want to discuss is a penalty APR rate. Now, once again, this kind of ties into that overarching variable APR category I talked about previously, but more specifically, the penalty APR rate is kind of a penalty incentive for you to try to make your payments on time, and if you can, in full. Otherwise, it will modify your overall APR rate for your said card or loan. So moving on to some tips to really kind of lower your APR. Now, the first one is going to be having excellent credit. Now, I know this one kind of seems obvious, and it can seem really impossible at times as well, but I promise you, if you start your credit repair journey today and start achieving your goals just one step at a time, even to getting a good credit score, you can really improve your APR rates and save yourself a lot of money in the long run. It's always worth it to do it for yourself. Another option for you is comparing cards and really do a deep dive. I kind of briefly covered this earlier, but you really want to, if you're able to go in person and really talk to a representative for the said card you're considering. Get that brochure and really kind of study it, as well as talking to the representative about the ballpark estimate kind of APR rates you could expect. And then leave with the brochure. You don't have to sign anything just because you go there and talk to somebody, and do the same thing for another card you're considering. And then once you have both brochures, or even 3, 4, or 5 for all of these cards you're considering, really compare every and each fine detail to really decide which card is going to be the best for you. And oftentimes people will chase after the rewards for some cards, which is fine, especially if you're an avid traveler, you may want to get a kind of travel incentive card, but you also want to consider other things like annual fees, as well as those APR rates like I've been discussing. Another thing you can really try to do is take advantage of those 0% introductory kind of offers they have. A lot of credit cards, especially when you roll into the new year, will offer a lot of bonus incentives like this, and sometimes if you find the right card, they can be a very long introductory period, upwards of even a year we've seen. So definitely be sure to check out some of our videos as well where we dive into some of these examples, and you can probably find those just right up there with the card. But definitely really try to consider a lot of those introductory offers. You may just glance over them at first and really not think anything of it, but once again, it can save you a lot of money in the long run. Another tip you can do to really try to get a lower APR rate is negotiate with the lender. Kind of sit down and talk with them and be like, hey, look, I'm really interested in a card like this, but I don't feel comfortable signing if I don't get a X APR rate. Well, sometimes they are going to be willing to actually lower some of those APR rates for you. And at the end of the day, it doesn't hurt you in any way to even try. So we always recommend to try and get the APR rates you want, and definitely negotiate about it too. Another tip is going to be try to separate the debt that you have if you have multiple credit cards. Now, a lot of people will just get one credit card and kind of consider it as their everyday card. Now, this is fine if you have a good credit score and get offered a great credit limit, but let's face it, a lot of us starting out from scratch aren't going to have those very exorbitant credit limits. So having one single everyday card could be a very risky way of accruing debt on just one single line of credit, which, like I said, with the utilization rate can actually hurt your credit score in the long run. So it's always a good idea to have one card dedicated as kind of your everyday spender, while you have another card that you kind of use for specific purchases to really target those rewards. Those can be anything from like gas cards to, travel cards, things like that. So to kind of cap things off with a quick FAQ, well, what scores help you get the lowest APR rate possible? Well, scores considered above 670 are going to be good, and that's generally where you're going to see the best APR rates. Now, that doesn't mean as soon as you hit 670, you're going to immediately get these 12 to 13% APRs. A lot of the time, you have to have above a 750 to get that, but you can expect very reasonable rates kind of around that score range. So remember, the higher your score, the lower that APR rate is going to be, and the more negotiating power you're going to have. So if you have a good credit score, you may want to kind of negotiate and really take advantage of that last tip I was kind of talking about. So finally, ending things off with the last final question, what is a kind of average APR rate? Well, that's going to be at 16.13%. So if you're kind of around there, you can expect to be in overall the United States average limit for an APR rate. Now, that isn't to say if you get offered a credit card that's around 20% or even 22%, you shouldn't take it, because like I said, it's all going to be based on your credit score and credit history. So honestly, take whatever best rate you're able to find, and once again, really try to negotiate as well. So all in all, remember, the lower the APR rate, the better. You're going to be saving a lot more money in the long run the lower that rate is, especially if you're going to be considering and keeping these cards for longer periods of time, which, let's face it, is always a really good idea. And just like with any other financial services, you want to make sure you do as much research you can. Remember, you're not on a time limit to sign that dotted line, so really take the time and discuss with as many different representatives as possible in detail about those cards and what you can expect as a longtime user of said cards or loans. Well, that about does it for today. My name is Michael, and thank you guys so much for tuning in to another episode of the Credit Agent Show, and I hope to see you guys in the next one.